Hello guys, welcome back. I just want to bring you a nice little video about the research I've been doing lately, and it's about Baal and Moloch, these scary deities of a distant past. And we hear in a lot of YouTube videos, especially about devil worshipping, Baal, child sacrifice, Moloch, the old Canaanite gods, the old gods from the Levant area, so-called the Levant area, Mesopotamian gods. But the more I look into Scottish or Celtic religion or theology, whatever they believed in, there seems to be a massive parallel with these Canaanite gods. And to be honest, like I said, I think the culture spread from west to east, not east to west. I think a lot of these gods started in Scotland, in the Western Isles, and in Ireland. Baal, for instance, Baal, if you look at place names in Scotland or in Ireland, there's so many places that begin with the name Baal. And there's even mountains called Moloch, Ben Moloch. So there's definitely parallels with these gods. And like in my earlier videos, guys, I showed you how Saint John, or John from the Bible, is stemmed from Sean, the Celtic god Shawnee, or Sean, and they anglicised it to John. So when I was looking on Google Earth, I came across this little place, Europa, or Europe, funnily enough. And this church here, Saint Moloch, and that's all they do, guys. Saint Moloch, they change all the Celtic gods and deities into saints. This is Moloch, but they've changed it to Saint Moloch. And I'll read you a little bit of this article that I found. The township of Europe lies close to the west side of Lewis, a mile south of its northern tip at the Butt of Lewis. As you drive back towards Europe for the Butt of Lewis, your attention is caught by a lone standing stone building standing in the fields to your left. This is the unique and beautiful St. Moloch's Church. So I'll go further down. The site is believed to have been consecrated since St. Moloch, a contemporary of St. Columba, built a chapel here in the 560s. The present building is of unknown age, with estimates of its build date ranging from 1100s to the 1500s. At the time of the Reformation, it was said to have been dedicated to St. Milrubber. So we've got all these saints. And what happened here when the Christian monks came to preach, they went to the old sites, the old pagan ritual sites, stone circles, or wherever they went to sacrifice or to give an offering to their gods. Well, the Christians came along and built churches on top of these sites, and they changed the gods into saints. And I kind of, like I said, proved it in one of my older videos, but I'll show you this one again from Saint Moloch. The Reformation in 1560 seems to have brought traditional Christian worship at the church to a temporary halt. A visitor in 1695, Martin Martin, reported that the church had, with the living memory of those he met, been the focus of pagan fertility festival each year on All Saints' Day, 1st of November. This was dedicated to the sea god Shawnee. So the sea god Shawnee. So this sea god Shawnee is unique to the Isle of Lewis. It doesn't come from anywhere else. It's Shawnee, and it will change to Sean. Islanders from across Lewis came to the church of St. Mulway, where the ale was brewed up from that season's grain. Some of this was offered up to Shawnee by an islander standing up to his waist in the sea at night. Those present then returned to the church, where the light provided by a single candle was extinguished, and islanders went into the surrounding fields and spent the rest of the night in dancing and singing, etc. Presumably the local birth rate peaked around the beginning of August each year. Martin Martin goes on to report that by the time of his visit, more Presbyterian elements in Lewis society had stopped this annual festival. It is tempting to wonder whether what he was told was actually true, or just an early example of urban mythology in action. What is more certain is that the church's traditional role as a centre for healing and pilgrimage continued to the 1600s and possibly well beyond. So this saint, this Shoni, we'll have a look at Shoni again. So this is the Celtic Shoni. The Shoni, anglicised Shawnee or Shoni, was a Celtic water spirit in Lewis, according to Martin Martin. Dwelly defines Shoni without the I, a related form in Scottish Gaelic, augury, sorcery, druidism, and quotes Martin further. Martin says that the inhabitants of Lewis used to propitiate Shoni by a cup of ale in the following manner. They came to the church of St Mulway, each man carrying his own provisions. Each family gave up a bag of malt. The whole was brewed into ale. One of their number was chosen to wade into the sea up to his waist, carrying his hand with a cup full of ale. When he reached the proper depth, he stood and cried aloud, Shoni, I give this cup of ale, hoping thou will be so good to send us plenty of seaweed used as fertiliser for enriching our ground during the coming year. He then threw the ale into the sea, and a ceremony performed at night. On his coming to land, they all repaired to church, where there was a candle burning on the altar. They stood for a time. When on given signal the candle was put out, and straightway they adjourned to the fields, where the night was spent mirthfully over the ale. Next morning they returned to their respective homes in the belief that they had ensured a plentiful crop for the next season. It seems likely that Shoni was originally some kind of god whose worship has been lightly Christianised. Now I think it's been heavily Christianised by the addition of various church features. However, it is also possible that Shoni, the Scottish Gaelic form of English Johnny, may be also a reference to one of the saints John. So there we go. Shoni is just Saint John, and this is evidence that these saints have got their roots in Scotland, because Lewis, that sea god Shoni, only comes from Lewis. It doesn't come from Egypt. It doesn't come from Turkey or any of the East Asian, like the minor Asian countries. It's definitely a Celtic god from Ireland and Scotland, and the Romans have took it on and changed it into a saint. Whether these gods they were doing human sacrifices to, or it was just a ritual like they were throwing in the ale. And it's the same with the fire ones. Baal. There's a lot of stories of children getting burned on this altar, this bull altar. And it seems like the Christians were trying to demonise Baal worship. Maybe there was another ceremony, and I heard that there's still some ceremonies in Scotland and in Ireland where it's called Baltane. It's a fire festival, and they jump through the fire. It's like a purification where you jump over the flames. So maybe these Christian monks were just exaggerating to demonise the old religions. Maybe there wasn't any child sacrifice. Everybody kind of knows there was human sacrifice. They found bodies in bogs in Ireland that looked like they were sacrificed. But when they add the whole child sacrifice, it makes this old religion seem demonic and evil and disgusting. But it's cool about the Mayans and the Incas. Everyone still thinks the Incas and the Mayans and the South American cultures were cool, even though they were killing humans en masse. But because it wasn't child sacrifice, they don't keep highlighting the child sacrifice. It's all right. I mean, but when it comes to the Baal worship or the Moloch, it seems to be evil and bad. But I'm not so sure. I think this could be just a way to tarnish old religions, because there's not much evidence of child sacrifice in Scotland, like child sacrifice. They found full-grown men chucked in bogs where they're tied up, but they're just presuming. So this is my point, guys, that I think the stories in the Bible, the New Testament, was all created in the British Islands, and mainly in Scotland and Ireland. I think they've plagiarised a lot of the stuff. They've just changed names, they've swapped names, they've changed some of the places. But when it comes to place names, if you look at Scotland and Ireland, there's no doubt. Right, guys, I'll put this one up. I'll have a little look at the Google Earth at some of the places, because that's the thing. There's place names hold for a long time. I've looked at old maps and there's all these places that are still there. And the natives named areas after their gods. So if they worship Baal, the beginning of their name would begin with Baal. But anywhere in Ireland you can go, there's one there. Ballyvorney, Ballingeary. It's the same in Scotland. Ballamory, the Balmoral. Just down the road from me is Ballgreen. Just up the road from me is Balerno. So this word Bal at the start of place names is common in Scotland and Ireland. There's Ballinskelligs. Honestly, you can go anywhere. You can point to anywhere on a map in Ireland. Northern Ireland, even Belfast, Ballymena, Ballyclare, Ballygowan, Ballynica. So, and this is in Ireland, and then you can see it's spread over to Scotland as well. This Baal worship, naming places with Baal. It doesn't take long before you find a Baal in Scotland. But it's usually near the islands you find them. There's one there. Ballintrae, Balkissock. We're now in Scotland. But anywhere you go, you'll find Baal. So Baal is obviously connected with the Canaanite god Moloch. And same again. If we go up to Lewis, and just like the church, because the church we were just looking at is here at the top, Europa, the top here. And the highest mountain on Lewis, guess it or not, where is it? That's not the highest one. This is the highest mountain in Lewis. Ben Moloch. Ben Moloch. Mholachch. So when we looked at Shawnee and Sean, how it was a sea god, it's funny how John the Baptist, he baptizes, he puts you under the water. Or John the Apostle, he was one of the closest friends to Jesus, and him and his brother James were known as the Brothers of Thunder. So here we are here, Moloch. Moloch is a biblical name of a Canaanite god associated with child sacrifice. The name of this deity is also sometimes spelled Molech, Malcolm, or Malcolm. And funnily enough, I found this as well, people. Malcolm of Scotland, Malcolm MacDonnell, Anglicide Malcolm, was king of Scots, becoming king when his cousin Constantine Maceda abdicated to become a monk. He was the son of Donald MacConstantine. That sounds like Constantine, doesn't it? But MLK, it comes from MLK, Malcolm. But we'll go back to Google Earth, because I found something really interesting as well. Not only do we have a Ben Moloch in Scotland, and lots of Baals everywhere, Baal and Moloch. If we go down to Ireland, I found something very interesting. We've got a school called St. Molagas. This is almost like St. Moloch as well. So guys, down in Ireland again, I found this school called St. Molagas, and I thought that's obviously similar to St. Molag and St. Moloch, Molag. So I went down to have a look at St. Molagas, and what did I find? Right beside St. Molagas, this whole street made into a Celtic cross. See that, guys? See the Celtic cross there? And if we have a look, the pagan sun worship, and this is what it was, guys. The Scots, the old ancient pagan Scots, the Gaels, they worshipped the sun, and they called the sun Baal, and they thought he was on a chariot going across the sky, and the wheel was the sun. So that Celtic cross you seen at that school, we recognise it from the front of the Pope. Here it is here. So we recognise this Celtic cross. So the symbols of Baal, here we go here, symbols of Baal. Of a special interest is a square basalt altar for burning incense. On one of its sides, a circle with a cross in the centre. The divine symbol of the Canaanite storm god is carved in low relief. So he was a storm god, rain god. This sounds like a Scottish god, because in Scotland, rain and storms are frequent. And like any ancient religions, the people, this is how religions start. People look at things in their environment, they can't understand them. Science hasn't been invented. So they give them a name, they give them a symbol. And this turns out to be a god eventually. So, as you can see here, the sun wheel that I found is a Baal symbol. And this is another Ben Moloch that I found. This was in Perth, Perthshire. It's another Ben Moloch. It's the highest hill, and it's funny. It's because it's usually the highest hills in the area are named after Moloch, this god. But like I said, they named him a saint called Saint Molog, and they kind of hid who he really was. Here you've got Baal, and his symbol is a bull and a sheep. And it's funny because in Scotland, the bull and the sheep are very important. In fact, lactose intolerance, the fact that 90% of Asians and Africans can't drink milk, dairy milk, and only 10% of Northern Europeans are lactose intolerant, shows that we have a symbiotic relationship with the bull and the cattle. So, in my eyes, all this Hebrew Bible and all the Bible stuff, they've just plagiarized the old religions, and they've gave them new names, turned them into saints. But I believe Baal was worshipped and Moloch was worshipped, and also El. El was worshipped in Scotland as well, because there's lots of names beginning with El, Ellen. But I'll read you this also. I found this to be pretty interesting. This was from a book that I found, quite an old book again. Byways of Scottish Story by George Eyre Todd. But I found this a very interesting book. It's quite a long passage, so I might have to find the exact. Oh, here we go. Baal, Bel, or Bellis. Right. I might have to just read the whole lot for you guys, just to make it. Right. So, guys, I'm gonna read this. To most minds, the chief interest, even so beautiful and picturesque, a country as Scotland, is not the natural scenery itself, but the life which was formerly lived within it. Round feudal castle and grey moat hall and earthen camp, the pedestrian pictures to himself pageants long past of strange and tragic meaning. Out of a place name alone, sometimes he conjures up a picture, beholds the eager figure of some long forgotten missionary saint, mingles in the fierce details of old barbaric onset, or pauses with the plaided victors of some stern-clad feud as they turn at nightfall to cleanse their weapons at the washing place of swords. Every fruit of the North Country keeps some memory of its own, crystallised in place name or tradition. and a slight effort of imagination only is needed to realise again the living drama of the past. This is what I'm saying, guys. Few, however, pause to consider how closely and by what familiar means the remote past links itself to the present hour. Nothing, indeed, appears more unlikely than the staid citizen of today should, all unconsciously, be using in constant practice many of the heathen rites and precepts of primeval savage ancestors. The fact, nevertheless, appears capable of clear proof, and a few instances may suggest to the most incredulous not only that the past lives in the present, but that Scotland today is largely ruled by ancient pagan usage and belief. Among the most curious of extant evidences of the ancient pagan faith of these isles are those of which declare our ancestors to have followed a form of sun worship. Some of our commonest acts stand onion these evidences. Not one person in 1,000, probably, who deals out of a pack of playing cards reflects that his method of doing so forms a silent acknowledgement of the ancient worship of Baal. The cards, as everyone knows, are invariably dealt from left to right, opposite the dealer. In the words, the way of the sun, and from the invention of playing cards is a comparatively modern affair. There can be little doubt that the order of dispensing them followed what was immemorial belief considered the proper or lucky direction. The other way, from right to left, withershins, as the Scots word has it, has always been deemed unlucky. So in the well-known ballad, The Lowlands o' Holland, the lady describing her lover's tragic fate sings, "My love then and his bonny ship gaed withershins about." So it was lucky to do everything from east to west, because that's how the sun rose and set. If you've done it back, like meaning dealing cards, if you're going to deal cards, or even if you stir your cup of tea, you start from east to west, because it's seen as good luck. It might, perhaps, be too much to say that every time a joiner puts in a screw nail, he is governed by the ancient rules of sun worship, but there can be little question that the first maker of screws was influenced in this manner of turning the thread by an inherited idea of the proper direction, and thus unconsciously followed the ordering of the ancient ritual of fire. This method, indeed, has become so ingrained by ancient sanction and many generations of use that to muscle and eye alike it now appears that natural one, while the other, the withershins direction, seems both unnatural and awkward. This theory has sufficient solid evidence to support it. So late as the end of last century there remained in Scotland ample testimony that the method of circling from left to right was deliberately regarded as a method sanctioned by the spiritual powers. In the statistical account of 1794, the Minister of Calendar furnishes some instances of this belief. When a Highlander goes to bathe, he says, or to drink water out of a consecrated fountain, he must always approach by going round the place from east to west on the south side, in imitation of the apparent diurnal motion of the sun. When the dead are laid in the earth, the grave is approached by going around the same manner. The bride is conducted to her future spouse in the presence of the minister, and the glass goes round a company in the course of the sun. This is called the Gaelic going round the right, or the lucky way. Many of the superstitions current to the present hour in Scotland remained obvious and direct relics of the worship of Baal and Ashtaroth. Every one has been told, for instance, sometime or another, on seeing the new moon rise, to bow 3 times and wish a wish, and everyone has heard that if, on first beholding the new moon, Lie turns the silver in his pocket 3 times around, Lie shall not want for money during all that month. What are all such axioms but survivals of ancient acts of worship of the moon goddess, the queen of heaven, the fair Ishtar, Ashtaroth, Astarte, or Aphrodite, whose silver rising from the sea has impressed the minds of race after race with feelings of strange awe, reverence, and adoration. Similarly, the burning of nuts, pulling of kale stalks, and other practices which still go on among the lads and lassies of every countryside at Halloween can only be accounted for as a lingering relic of the early faith. According as a pair of nuts spurt away from each other or burn peacefully together in the corner of fire into which they are dropped, the village lass foretells that their path of love shall be rough or smooth, and according as the kale stalk torn up in the dark prove straight or crooked, short or long, sweet or bitter, with erd on its root or bare, she pictures the personal appearance, disposition, and wealth of her future spouse. Doubtless these same rites or something like them, were practised in early Scotland for the same purposes by the priests of Baal. At any rate, we know from Diodorus Siculus, an eyewitness, that the rites of divination had a place in the ancient pagan worship of these islands, and some of the details given by him correspond with the surviving practices. Moreover, the date of Halloween, the 30th of October, corresponds with what we know to have been one of the great Druid festivals. On that night, in pre-Christian times, the people gathered about their great stone altars to wait for the sunrising and the descent of the sacred flame, the gift of their god from which they might rekindle the household fires for another year, to the present hour, according to the author of Prehistoric Man in Ayrshire, London, 1896. In the parish of Kilwinning, the day which then dawned, the 1st of November, is known as Bell's Day. Divination rites, again of pagan origin, adapted for special circumstances, appear to have been practised in Scotland till a recent date. One of these, it will be remembered, is recounted by Scott in the episode of Brian the Hermit in The Lady of the Lake, when the white bull was slain with the mystic observances and the seer wrapped himself in the glory hide to procure a foresight of his clan's fate. Of kindred nature, doubtless, were the means employed by Eilean nan Crech, Alan of the Forays, the Cameron chief of the 15th century, when he came to Tor Castle, above Loch Lynn, to consult the Tig Germ, or familiar spirit of his house. And of the same sort of origin, it may be believed, were the rites and incantations for the practice of which 300 years ago many a poor old witch was burned. The worship of one age becomes the devilry of the next, and what was a pious proceeding of a Druid priesthood becomes a service of Satan in the hands of a 16th century cronies. Still another Druid festival survives in Hogmanay. The peculiar ceremony of sitting up to bring in the year remains to represent the essential feature of Baal worship, the watch for the rising of the sun. There is also the curious custom of first footing, with the ideas of good or ill luck for the year being the result respectively of a fair or dark visitor crossing the threshold first, and above all, there is mystic mistletoe to identify the observance with the Druid festival of Yule. We are familiar with the ceremony described by Pliny of the Druid cutting down the green branch with a golden sickle in the sacred grove. This mistletoe, the soul of Avallanu, the apple tree as the Druids thought it, and as it was being sung by the pagan Merlin in the 6th century, keeps thus to the present hour something of his ancient reverence in the eyes of men. Even the great summer festival of the Baal worshippers has left remains in the folk custom of the country, though it has not had the advantage, like Halloween and Hogmanay, of coinciding in date with any modern observance. The chief seat of the festival in Scotland was probably the great central mountain, which was still known as Ben Ledi, the Hill of God. On the west side of the summit of Ben Ledi, it is possible even yet to make out traces of the earthen galleries from which the people watched for the rising of the Beltane, or sunfire, on the actual summit. The mountain altar a few yards on the east. The day which then dawned, the 2nd of May, is still known in Scotland as Beltane Day. It is perpetuated locally by occasions like the Beltane fire at Peebles, by place names like Till Beltane in Perthshire, and the survivals of certain curious, unmistakable customs to be referred to in another page. That's a bit freaky because my mum's birthday was on the 2nd of May, and she was a Taurus. Next to the survival of actual customs belonging to the pagan past, probably the most significant traces of our fire worship traditions are to be found in the place names throughout the country. Few such place names of common occurrence may be mentioned. Gallowgate or Gallowhill, and like I said guys, I've done this whole Gal videos as well about the Gaels, the Gals, because you've got Celtic culture, but if you want to be more specific, you had the French Gauls, and you had the Scottish and Irish Gaels. You had different tribes of Celts that had their own customs. Anyway, Gallowgate or Gallowhill, names common enough in towns like Glasgow or Aberdeen, contain therein some root to believe direct evidence of pagan origin. In the opinion of certain archaeologists, Gallowgate and Gallowhill are not necessarily mere contractions for Gallowsgate and Gallowshill. By coincidence, indeed, they may have acquired a connection with that comparatively modern means of judicial execution, the gallows, but it appears just possible that Gallowgate represents the gate or way to the Gaelia, or sorcery stone. The laws, again, which abound throughout the country, such as Dundee Law, North Berwick Law, and Lomond Law in Fife. And like I said, guys, all these hills that I go up, they're all laws. They've all got the name Law behind them. Threapmuir Law. Law in Fife comes, it is said, from the same root. A popular notion, it is true, runs that these eminences were the spots on which these rulers of early times held courts of legislature on justice. Justice of a kind, no doubt, was administered there, but at that early date it was not known by the name of the law. On or near these hills, there is stronger reason to believe, stood the menhir or cromlech of the Druid, and from this fact the hills took their name as places of the Leah or sacred stone. Among other place names with a pregnant meaning, none is perhaps more common than Clachan. In its first meaning, the Gaelic word signifies nothing more less than the stones. Until recent times, however, Highland hamlets were mainly built of turf, only the church being a stone erection. It was a church, therefore, which gave its descriptive name to the Clachan, almost to the present day, according to Jamieson's History of the Chaldees. To go to the Clachan and go to worship were synonymous expressions in the Highlands, and so the editors of the Gaelic Dictionary of 1831 define a clachan as a village or a hamlet in which a parish church is situate. It was pointed out, however, by the late Dr. Wiley in his History of the Scottish Nation that many of these collations there is not now, nor ever was, a parish church or place of Christian worship of any sort, and further, that these hamlets have held the rank of clachan from a date when there was not a stone house in them, and their inhabitants dwelt in mud huts or fabric of wattles. The explanation of the name, the historian avers, is to be found in the fact that these spots stood the circle of unhewn stones, the grey sun temple of the Druid. It is also possible to point as evidence of Druid survival to the various altanes, liatanes, and liastanes, or stones of fire, which in such various corrupted forms as Alton, Hilton, Leighton, and Liston exist in Scotland at the present day. At each of these spots stands some great conspicuous stone to which immemorial tradition has assigned a sacred or uncanny character. There is the stone of Liston, 9.5 feet high, standing in the east of a mansion house of Old Liston in the neighbourhood of the stone circle tumulus known as the Hully Hill, which I was, guys. I was at Hully Hill Cairn. And a mile to the west of the Cathedral of Aberdeen stands the Hilton Stone, a great granite column 10 feet high and 3 feet square, on each side of which, till 1830, stood a massive Druid circle of monoliths. The latter stone, it appears, stands on ground which has always been church property, and from it the city has grown around, no doubt derived the name, by which it's still sometimes called in Gaelic, Altain e Aberdeen, the Stone of Fire, at the mouth of the Black River, commonly corrupted in English to Altoon o Aberdeen. With such profuse survivals in place names, festival customs, and traditional habits, who shall say that the people of Scotland have got rid entirely of the pagan character of some worshipping ancestors? At the Reformation in the latter half of the 16th century, John Knox and his fellow churchmen exerted themselves vigorously to abolish not only the feasts and usage of the Church of Rome, but all traditional customs which appeared to them to be without express sanction of the Holy Writ. Many examples of their efforts might be quoted. Bishop Carswell in 1576, in the preface of his Gaelic translation of Knox's Forms of Prayer and Catechism, declaims with pious severity against histories then extant and popular in the Highlands, concerning warriors and champions, and Finnegal, the sons of Comal, with his heroes. 2 years later, the Wedderburns of Dundee, in the title page of their Good and Goldie Ballads, state that their work to consist of pious compositions changed out of profane sangus for avoiding of sin. In December 1583, Glasgow Kirk Session ordered 5 persons to make public repentance because they kept the superstitious day called Yule. And later still, in the days of William Orange, the magistrates of Glasgow found it necessary to forbid going through the town in the night time, masquerading as serenading in company with viols or other instruments of music in any numbers. Anything like idle song, dancing, and mirth was an anathema in the eyes of these reformers, and Yuletide, revelry, and May Day festival were rank service of the powers of evil. So effectively did they carry out their crusade against everything that savoured of carnal amusement that they did not only plat down the practices of the church against which they warred, but even altered to a strange degree the national character. Previous to that time, if we were to believe the ancient literature of the country port like Christ's Kirk on the Green and the works of Dunbar and Sir Richard Maitland, and prose descriptions like that of Froissart, Ennius, Sylvius, Pedro de Ayala, and the Complaint of Scotland, the people of this north country were a gay, light-hearted, amorous race. But by the efforts of John Knox and his followers in the 16th century, most of this was changed. The temper and the manners of the people took that air of sombre and ascetic seriousness which is painted for us in the writings of men like John Howe of Lochgoyne and the present-day chroniclers of Thrums and Drumtochty. In this crusade of the reformers, no doubt, many an interesting custom of the pagan past, surviving in the form of quaint country usage and festival observance, must have been suppressed. But the destroyers were not completely successful. 100 years later, in 1649, the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland found it advisable to take steps to destroy popular reverence for certain relics of heathen worship. Certain superstitious practices, it appears, were in common vogue among the people. One of these was the preservation, unfulfilled and untouched from immortal time, of certain plots of land spoken of as the good man's land and the guid man's fauld, reputed to be the haunt and special possession of spirits able to foretell the future to those who sought them and suitable rites. At the instance of the Commission, farmers were compelled to plough these sacred fields and yoke their cattle on the ancient festivals, and housewives were obliged to keep their ingalls alight on Beltane no less on other eyes. Not even the rigours of Kirk Session and clerical commissions, however, in the most rigorous time, could utterly abolish usages which have had the sanction of such ancient observance, and down into the present century, strange though it may seem, there still have been practised arts of distinct and avowed worship of the Druid deities, Baal and Ashtaroth. Already on a previous page preference has been made to the custom observances of Beltane, Halloween and Hogmanay. Besides these, however, many isolated customs still extant, or extant till a recent date, possess curious interest. It is some 70 or 80 years, for instance, since the black stones of Iona were destroyed by a maniac. The stones were each composed of a single block of dark-coloured granite, curiously carved, 5 feet in height and 2 broad. On them, down to a recent period, the Highland chiefs made oaths of offence and defence, considered of all oaths the most binding and terrible, and even yet, if the writings of Miss Fiona Macleod are to be considered circumstantial, an oath is sometimes taken on the black stones. There can be little doubt that these stones were relics of the pagan faith, of which Iona was a centre. Other relics of that faith still remain, and superstitions such as those connected with the wells of the winds and the wells of the age of Dun. Before leaving on a voyage, sailors used to repeat a formula at the well of the wind they specially desired, and the aged had only had to perform a rite at the well of age in order to feel their youth renewed. A unique but significant tradition is that the Angel Hills of Iona. On these mounds, it is said, the angels were wont to alight on their visits to earth. The reference to angels makes it appear a Christian tradition, but probability carries a legend to an earlier date and makes it refer most reasonably to a detail of sun worship, the angel hills being spots which most obviously catch the early rays of the sun. At heart, indeed, to the present hour, Iona remains far more pagan than Christian. It seems to have been the policy of the early Christian missionaries in Scotland to establish themselves near headquarters of the older pagan worship, and this is what I was saying earlier with the St Molag's Church. They built it in the old spots of ancient worship. They did this at Iona and Glasgow, and the same thing seems to have been done in the Holy Loch in the Firth of Clyde. Here, as in Iona, something of pagan custom has lived through the Christian centuries and survives to the present day. The late Crimean Simpson described the burial place of the Argyll family at Calmun in the Daily News of the 4th of June, 1878, wrote as follows: On the side of the Loch Siante, as this small inlet of water is called in Gaelic at the village of Sandbach, there is an interesting old cromlech known in the region as Adam's Grave. Unfortunately, the tradition that Adam was buried at this place does not find confirmation from any source. The probable origin of this curious myth may be that the sound of the Gaelic name led to it. It is called Ardan Adam. This word is supposed to be a corruption of Ardan na Tuam, the height of the grave. Lovers come from all parts of Cowal to make their vows at this old shrine. The lady has to creep into the recess formed by the stones and hold the hand of the gentleman, who stands at the entrance while he repeats in Gaelic a curious oath, and the spot is considered so sacred that a terrible fate is believed to befall anyone who should prove unfaithful to the froth thus plighted. Till quite recently, before a ship set sail from the port of Gourock on the Clyde, the sailors thought it necessary to walk 7 times round a menor on a point of land known as the Kempock Stane. But most striking, perhaps, of the pagan customs remembered in the country are those connected with the great summer festivals of the Druids. Particularly interesting is a custom practiced within the last 100 years in the district of Menteith. It is described that the statistical account of Scotland upon the first day of May, says the writer, which is called Beltane or Beltane Day, all the boys in a township or hamlet meet on the moors. They cut a table in green sod of a round figure by casting a trench in the ground of such circumference as to hold the whole company. They kindle a fire and dress a repast of eggs and milk in the consistence of custards. They knead a cake of oatmeal which is toasted at the embers against a stone. After the custard is eaten up, they divide the cake into so many portions as similar as possible to one another in size and shape as there are persons in the company. They daub one of the portions all over with charcoal until it be perfectly black. They put all the bits in the cake into a bonnet. Every one blindfold draws out a portion. He who holds the bonnet is entitled to the last bit. Whoever draws the black bit is a devoted person who is to be sacrificed to Baal, whose favour they mean to implore in rendering the year productive and sustenance for man and beast. There is little doubt, continues the narrator, of these inhuman sacrifices having been once offered in this country as well as in the East, although they now pass from the act of sacrificing and only compel the devoted person to leap 3 times through the flames, with which act the ceremonies of the festival are closed. An account almost similar is given by an eyewitness, the Reverend Alexander Hislop of Arbroath, in The Two Babylons, Edinburgh, 1862. In this case, the custom described was practised on Beltane Eve in the neighbourhood of Crieff. The exact location of the rite was a Druid circle where the ceremony had probably taken place annually in unbroken succession from pagan times. Within the circle, it was a custom for a number of men and women to assemble. They light a fire in the centre, says the narrator. Each person puts a bit of oatcake in a shepherd's bonnet. They all sit down and draw a blindfold, a piece from the bonnet. One piece has been previously blackened, and whoever gets the piece has to jump through the fire in the centre of the circle and pay a forfeit. This is, in fact, the ancient worship of Baal. Formerly, the person on whom the lot fell was burned as a sacrifice. Now, passing through the fire represents the burning, and the payment of a forfeit redeems the victim. Still, another instance of the survival of Beltane observance is furnished by Dr. Eadie in his well-known biblical cyclopedia, A Town in Perthshire. He says, on the borders of the Scottish Highlands is called Tilly Beltane, that is, the eminence or rising ground of the fire of Baal. An enclosure of 8 upright staves is made where it is supposed the fire was kindled, and a well in the vicinity is held in great veneration. After drinking from it, the people pass around the temple 9 times in a procession. In Ireland, Dr. Eadie continues, Beltane is one of the festival days, and the fires are made early on the tops of the hills, and all the cattle are made to pass through them. This is supposed secures them from contagion and disease from that year. At Mucklin in Ayrshire, up almost to the present time, it may be added, there was an observance of this sort carried on. Again, in McLachan's Early Scottish Church, it is stated that there are places in Scotland where, within the memory of living man, the Tyne Eigean, or forced fire, was lighted once every year by the rubbing of 2 pieces of wood together, while all fires in the neighbourhood were extinguished in order that they might be lighted anew from this sacred source. The festal character of Beltane Day in the country in the 16th century is commemorated in the opening of James V's famous poem, At Beltane Cuihin ilk bodies bowness to Peebles to the play. The sport of Beltane, indeed, were celebrated in Peebles till a recent date, when a market was established known as the Beltane Fair. It may be interesting here to note, for its similar character, that the 24th of June is still kept as a fire festival in several parts of Germany and in Denmark on the St. John's Eve, 23rd of June. Fires are made to burn out the witches. Of the many interesting customs of the obviously pagan origin, still practised throughout Scotland at Halloween. Something has already been said on a previous page, and they are not likely to be forgotten, so long as the Scotsmen delight in the poetic descriptions of Burns. The common tradition observance of Hogmanay and the rites of the Druid mistletoe has also been alluded to, but it may surprise some readers to know that the ancient Druid festival of Yule is still observed in more than one locality in Scotland with something of the ancient ritual of fire. And at a recent meeting of the anthropological section of the British Association, Mr. Lawrence Gomey referred to one typical instance of survival of this fire custom. At Biggar in Lanarkshire it appears on the last day of the old year. The villagers used to collect a quantity of fuel. About 9 o'clock the heap was lightened. Each person deemed it a duty to throw a faggot into the flames. The fire was kept alight till well into New Year's Day, and from it the villagers relit their own extinguished hearths. Well, how much is left to go? A still more interesting custom survives at Birkhead on the coast of the Moray Firth. The burning of the clave, as the ceremony is called, was the subject some years ago of a striking picture by a Scottish artist, Mr. J. Lockhead, and a writer in the Illustrated London News of the 16th of February 1895 referred to the picture, now in the possession of Sir Hugh W. Young of Birkhead, described the observance as follows. The burning of the clave is a mysterious ceremony of which the origin is absolutely lost in the night of the prehistoric tradition. Similar rites are said to be celebrated in the remote parts of Russia and even Brittany, but how far they coincide with those still observed at Birkhead cannot be determined. The ceremony has been referred to a Roman, a Scandinavian, and even to a Druidical origin, while others insist it is a survival of the worship of Baal, which, as is well known, was practised among the Gauls down to comparatively recent times. The last night of the year, old style, is the anniversary of the custom. A huge tar barrel was carried up to the old fortifications, which are unknown to antiquity, Roman or Cyclopean. The tar barrel is then sawn into two equal halves. The larger half and a small herring barrel are then broken up and placed inside the smaller half with an abundance of tar and become known as the clave. This is now fixed upon a prop about 5 feet long by the means of an iron nail, driven home by a smooth stone, for no hammer is allowed to be used. When all is completed, the contents of the filled clave are set on fire with a burning peat, nothing sulphureous being permitted to approach. Formerly the clave was carried around every vessel in the harbour, and a handful of grain thrown into each boat. This is now abandoned, and the burning clave is borne down to the bone, to the junction of its two principal streets, followed by cheering crowds of Birkhedians, who vie with each other in plucking burning brands from the mass. Possession of such a token being sure safeguard against ill luck. So this is just going on about some of the old remnants of Baal worship. Let's see. Right, we'll go here. So I don't want to make this video too long. Right here. We'll go into this chapter. Baal, Bel or Belus, the son of the Lord of Heaven, is well known to have been worshipped with fire and sacrificed by the ancient peoples of Carthagena, Phoenicia, Babylon, Assyria, and others. The name is incorporated in such cognomens as Hannibal, Jezebel, the modern Isabel, Belshazzar, and Beelzebub, in the same way as the Jewish Jah or Jehovah appears in the names like Elijah and Isaiah. Hardly less an object of worship was the moon goddess, the queen of heaven, known by different races under the name of Ashtaroth, Istar, Astarte, Aphrodite. Only the other day, an inscribed stone of Nabonidus, last of the Babylonian kings, discovered in the neighbourhood of Babylon by Pierre Victor Squale, was found to relate the destruction and restoration of the temple of Istar of Erech, a golden shrine supported by 7 lions, in the year 604 BC. Upon the nature of the rites of which these gods were worshipped in the East, illumination is thrown by many of the Bible reference. Of about the date of restoration of the temple of Istar, mentioned above, is the impassioned lamentation of Ezekiel over the Phoenician king. Thou wast in Eden, the garden of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. There is also the memorial description of the scene of Carmel, when Elijah changed the priests of Baal to show the power of their God, and they took the bullock which was given to them, and they dressed it, and called on the name of Baal, saying, O Baal, hear us. And they leaped out of the altar which was made, and they cried aloud and cut themselves after their manner with knives and lances till the blood gushed out upon them. Not less interesting is a description given in Numbers, whatever the Roman numerals are. It is believed to have been about the year 1452 BC when the occasion of the narrative befell. The children of Israel were approaching the end of the desert wanderings. Amorites and Ammonites have been defeated by the strange dark people from the wilderness, and Og, king of Bashan, has been overthrown and slain. The wandering tribes were encamped on the last and narrow plain by the Jordan. Before them, westward across the river, lay the promised land, with Gilgal and on the rich day of Jericho in sight, and behind them rose the dark heights of the Abarim mountains, with their summits Nebo, Pisgah and Peor towering against the sky. It was while they lay there, expecting any day the command to strike above them 3 separate times in the dust of dawn, they beheld the summit circled with a coronet of fire. These were the fires kindled by Balak, the ring of Moab, in his frantic fear at the instance of Balaam, his prophet, whom he sent for a curse o'er the people at the city of black tents at his feet. And it came to pass in the morning that Balak took Balaam and brought him up to the 8 places of Baal, and he saw thence the utmost parts of the people. And Balaam said unto Balak, Build me here 7 altars, and prepare me here 7 bullocks and 7 reins. And Balak did as Balaam had spoken, and Balak and Balaam offered on every altar a bullock and a rein. And Balaam said unto Balak, Stand by thy burnt offering, and I will go. Peradventure the Lord will come to meet me, and whatsoever he showeth me, I will tell thee. And he went on to a bare height. But like I said before, people, I think a lot of these so-called Middle Eastern stories were stemmed in Britain. Perhaps, however, the fullest of all early descriptions of the worship carried out on these Druidic temples is given by Caesar. In many communities of these people, he says, in their sacred places are to be seen raised sacrificial mounds. The whole Celtic race was given over to religion, and it was a custom for those afflicted with grievous sicknesses and those engaged in battles and dangerous enterprises either to sacrifice other men as victims or to vow themselves to the sacrifice. At these oblations the Druids were the ministers. They judged it impossible to appease the gods for the life of one man except by offering up the life of another. Sacrifices of this kind were publicly offered. Some of the tribes were in the habit of weaving wicker images of huge size. These were filled with living persons, fire was kindled below, and the whole reduced to ashes. Such sacrifices they deemed highly pleasing to the immortal gods. The sacrifices were generally persons taken in the acts of murder or theft, but when these proved scarce, they even made use of innocent people. The Druids, Caesar further declares, worshipped by many gods, in each of whom finds a likeness to some god of Rome, Mercury, Jupiter, Apollo, Minerva, or Mars. The priests acted both as the judges and teachers of the people. Among other doctrines, they taught that the souls of men did not perish, but passed at death from one body to another, a belief which spurred the warriors to the greatest bravery and brought them to scorn the terrors of death. To the young, the historian adds, they taught many things beside concerning the stars and their movements, the universe and the size of worlds, natural history, and the strength and the powers of these immortal gods. Baal worship appears to have been practiced in Scotland down to the time when Christianity was introduced in the 4th century. The lives of the early saints bear plentiful testimony to the fact. Indeed, as has been already remarked, Columba planted his church expressly to compete with the pagan faith. In that faith's holiest place, Iona, St. Munn, founded this church on the shore of what was a holy loch before his time, and Kentigern set up his cell at Glasgow to counteract the worship at the neighbouring great pagan temple at Craigmaddy Moor. We find too that after the manner of all the apostles, the early Christian missionaries found it necessary to discredit the machinery of the older faith. They invented the legend that the mistletoe for having supplied the wood for the cross was degraded from a tree to a parasite, and we have the historical testimony already referred to that the supremacy of the pagan faith was only finally destroyed at the Battle of Arthuret in 573. From all this, what is to be gathered? The Celtic tribes, we know from their languages and the teaching of philology, were an early wave of the great Indo-European race which flowed westwards from Asia in a bygone age and covered Europe. Little is known of the circumstances of that far-off migration. It would appear, however, as as if the tribes had brought with them in that early time the remains of a civilization infinitely greater than anything that hitherto been credited to them. Hitherto. In their marvellous mechanical and astronomical knowledge, and their worship by means of fire of a spiritual god, may be identified something akin to the Chaldean lore, the memory of which has survived with a dim awe in the tradition of all ages. The Druid faith of Caledonia appears to even been purer and an elder branch than its cousin in Chaldea, and the Chaldean monuments lately exhumed by American explorers at Nippur and M. de Sarzi at Lagash date as far back as year 4000 BC. It would almost seem, indeed, as if the worship practised around these menhirs, cromlechs and circles of Scotland worship, of which fragments remain in the practice of all of us to the present day, were a remnant of some primeval knowledge owned by the earliest fathers of our race on the Shinar plain. So the author thinks that maybe they brought it over here, I think, long ago. But I've got a feeling all these gods began their story in the Scottish Islands. This was another. I was looking at Balmoral Forest. Same again, I was looking at the Balmoral Forest. And I was just looking for a place. And I found another Moloch. Again, Moloch. This is an old map. There we go. Moloch. 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 So we have the Balmoral Forest here. And if you look close, you will soon see places of similar name. Balak, Balok, Balno, Balmore, Balaclagan, Balnult, so like I said, if you look at any map, any time in Scotland, there's always been Bals. There's always been Bals. Place names beginning with Bal. This is a Ballochbew forest. Ballantinium. And Ireland's just as bad. Ireland's got more probably than Scotland. It's got just as many Bals. So people, I hope you've enjoyed this little presentation, and I'm going to leave yous with a great poem I found on YouTube. I'm just going to change the mic so it's coming through the computer.
Come with me, fair maiden Lilias. Come and sit a space with me, for the powsill purls and prattles gently by this old thorn tree. Come and stir good thoughts within me with bright looks of kindly cheer. Sweetly flows an old man's story, with the young are fond to hear. Yesterday when I was wandering, over the broad law's treeless back, came a mist, a white mist floating, slowly o'er the moory track. And ever as it travelled lightly, where the fitful breeze might be, it took new shapes of strangest seeming that looked weirdly upon me. Now a whale, and now an ostrich, with a neck of longest span, now a camel, now a white bear, now a snowy-locked old man. And I thought an old man Merlin, wizard of the Tweed, mourning o'er the twig-cleft kingdom, wailing o'er his waning creed. For he was a heathen Lilias, mighty man of place and pride, counsellor and bard and prophet in the kingdom of Strathclyde. And when Roderick to the false gods false and faithful to the true, in the battle of Ardered, slew the mightful Gwendolew. Merlin old, his bard and prophet, cleaving to the Cymric creed, mourning o'er the loss and worship, wandered lonely by the Tweed. Seeking death but might not find it, for he deemed it sin to die, with a self-implanted dagger in the bright sun's beaming eye. And he came to where Merlzier's kirk looks o'er the Powsill brook, and sadly here with thoughtful brooding on a stone his seat he took. Here he sate with none to friend him in his sorrow and his dole, but his little dog a black one, and a young pig white as wool. Sate and looked when lo a figure, cloaked and cowled with solemn gait, through the shower and through the sunglint, came where wizard Merlin sate. Came as one that hath a message, where delay might father loss. On his breast a death's head embroidered, in his skinny hand a cross. Who art thou? Cried Merlin, coming from the east where dwell my foes. I have here enough of sorrows, let me feed upon my woes. Cause have I to hate the traitor, who hath laid my monarch low, spared to triumph rudely over me, prostrate in my utter woe. Cause have I to hate the Christian, hence and give mine eyes release from thy death's heads and thy crosses, let old Merlin die in peace. Fond old man, I may not leave thee, I am here by God's command, with dear balm of benediction, near thy bed in death to stand. I am Kentigern, my mother, not far from the Isle of May, daughter of the King of Lothian, bore me in wondrous way. Said Thinnu, my blissful mother, whom the spiteful waves did toss, rudely in a fragile shallop, prisoned, bore me at Culross. And sent Serf from where Lochleven laves the roots of Lomond the Ben, washed me thoroughly in the water of regeneration then, and my mother there devoted me to God the one, the true, to the savage west to wander, and convert the heathen crew. Bless the Lord this day, old Merlin, in the dear name of Thinnu, I am come with God's salvation on the tree who died for you. Mock me not, thou shallow shaveling, thy young God rides on high. In the pure old druid worship I have lived and I will die. Gods in guise of man we know not, scourged and pierced and crucified. God we own above all human, Baal careering in his pride. Baal whence flows fire's holy fountain, pulsing with the pulse of might. Baal that o'er yon green Trahenna streams with floods of holy light. Baal whose voice is in the thunder, rolling far from glen to glen. Baal whose glance is lightning darted from the blue crest of the Ben. Baal whose fiery virtue melleth crusted ice and stony hail into rills that leap redundant, spreading sweetness through the vale. Him I own within me, in the great and in the small, in the near and in the far off, in the each and in the all. Tempt me not with human saviours, gods to handle and to feel. To the bright broad eye of heaven, life-dispensing Baal I kneel. Preach the cross to savage Saxons, crosses come and near nigh. As old druid wisdom taught me, I have lived and I will die. Then with holy land uplifted, spake the saintly Kentigern, and with swelling eye of pity, old man, thou hast much to learn. But the gnarled oak can no man bend like rush or osier wand. Take my love and take my blessing with thee to the spirit land. All where lives a thoughtful reason, in the sky and in the sword, mind and thought and shaping reason, this we worship one true God. Sun and moon and forky living, floods by sea and storms by land are but ministers and servants, tools in the great Master's hand. Take my prayer and take my blessing, though I may not move thy will, who my serve hath gracious magic, to bring good from harshest ill. In his house are many mansions, if the heart is pure and true, he can save with stretch of mercy, Merlin old and Gwendolew. Spake, and with his cloak wrapped round him eastward o'er the moor he strode, leaving wise old Merlin brooding strangely o'er the Christian's God. But his brooding must be barren. Who can change an old man's creed? Romish gods might not be devils, but Baal was God for Merlin's need. With an eye of moody wandering gaze he followed Kentigern, where he brushed the purple heather, where he swept the plumy fern. And he wandered o'er the moorland, wrapped in sorrow and in dole, with his small black dog behind him, and his young pig white as wool. Wandered till he found a hollow cavern by the river's brim, where a witch, a wily lady with a strong spell, prisoned him. And she kept him near the fell, till his eyes with age grew dim, and the wily Fear the false one mixed a cup of death for him. And wayfaring people found him, stretched beside the river's brim, and beneath this ragged thorn tree, here they dug a grave for him. And his small black dog they buried, and his little pig with him. And they wailed before the sun god, sadly by the river's brim. Weep for him and kiss me, Lilias, kindly kisses help our need, when a tearful story moves us on the flowery banks of Tweed.
So guys, I just thought it was perfect to end my presentation. I hope you enjoyed this one, people, and I will see you all very soon. Remember, don't always believe what they're telling you about these biblical stories and places, because I think they stem from Britain and Ireland.